The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It is, of course, Remembrance Sunday, and at 11 o'clock we will, with the rest of the nation, observe the 2-minute silence. And during the rest of that hour, I will play you some interviews that I took with veterans of conflicts from the Second World War to the present day. I was down outside Westminster Abbey for the Field of Remembrance ceremony, and I think you'll find some stunning interviews there. But I'll be asking you to tell me, what does Remembrance Day mean to you? But first, Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator from the European Union, has given Britain an ultimatum. We have 2 weeks to come up with the money to give Northern Ireland a completely separate, different arrangement to the rest of the United Kingdom. And if we don't do that, then at the 15th of December, when all the leaders of Europe meet, he will advise them that insufficient progress has been made and that we cannot move on to talk about trade. And all of this, as we've just passed the 500-day mark since we voted Brexit, and we have 500 days left to go until the end of March 2019. Now, I mean, clearly, from my point of view, this is wholly unacceptable. Why would you give away a vast sum of money? And we are talking something just over £50 billion. Why would you do that if you actually haven't got a promise of anything in return? And I have to say that I do find Michel Barnier, though personally always very polite, as a political operative, arrogant in the extreme. And I'll be telling you later on in the show about the response that I got on Friday. If you remember, I wrote to him last week to say, well, if you're going to meet Ken Clarke and Lord Adonis and Nick Clegg, and they're all coming to the Berlaymont to talk about Brexit, what about having a meeting with me, given that I lead the biggest delegation of British MEPs in Brussels and Strasbourg? And I'll tell you later on in the hour what his response is. But to begin, I want to try and remove us a bit from politics. I want to think about these negotiations. I want to think about Brexit from a business perspective, because virtually nobody involved in frontline British politics has ever been in business, has ever bought and sold a good, has ever taken a risk. Let's think about these negotiations from a purely business point of view. And I'm very fortunate that I've got a businessman coming on the line here who has done one or two things in his life. His name is Tim Martin. He's the chairman and founder of the pubs group Wetherspoon. Tim, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, during that referendum campaign, Tim, I think we shared a platform together down in Weymouth, and you were a believer that Brexit was the right thing for the country. 500 days in, do you have any regrets at all about that?
I have none whatsoever, no. I'm convinced that Brexit will bring us more democracy. I hope we can save £200 million a week, and I hope we don't do a deal with the EU and submit to the pressure which you've mentioned, because, and I think this is the biggest dog which hasn't barked so far, if we don't sign a deal with the EU, the UK government has the power to abolish food tariffs which the EU charges on food imports from non-EU countries.
Oh, Tim, this can't be right. I heard the boss of... No, you must have got this wrong, Tim. I mean, you've got some very good pubs, and I do enjoy one or two of them, but you must have this wrong, Tim, because everybody... I've heard Nick Clegg telling me. I've heard, you know, who am I thinking of? Oh, Ken Clarke, of course. He's told us. And the boss of Sainsbury's and the CBI. They've all told us that food prices, Tim, will go through the roof.
I'm afraid to say it's the biggest, let's put it this way, it's the biggest misapprehension in history, because the way it works is, and it's worth just explaining it in 1 minute, the way it works is, if there's no deal, we revert to World Trade Organization rules. Now, a lot of people honestly believe, even the excellent Andrew Neil, who does a politics program on television, believes if there's no deal, you revert to WTO rules, then tariffs apply. That's not correct. Parliament has the power then to eliminate food tariffs or any other tariffs it wants to, which automatically means there are no tariffs from the EU either. So the UK will then trade tariff-free with the world. Now, that will mean that food prices in the UK will come down. I was talking to Chuka Umunna yesterday, a Labour minister.
Yep.
He convinced me that he honestly believes that huge food tariffs will result if there's no deal. He's wrong about that, and I think that that's the Parliament in all conscience then cannot vote if we leave the EU and there's no deal in March 2019 for higher food prices. The irony of all this is the great transitional deal, which the CBI says is necessary, and the other people you've mentioned say is necessary for the future of the country in order to avoid chaos, will actually mean that food prices are higher than if there's no deal.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that frankly, Tim, almost nobody else is making. So that's very, very interesting, and I'd be fascinated to get some feedback from the public on that. But as a businessman, Tim, as a businessman, what would you do right now? You've got Michel Barnier literally giving us an ultimatum, saying to us, promise us 60 billion euros, allow Northern Ireland to effectively break, in many ways, from the United Kingdom. I mean, how would you respond to this 2-week ultimatum if you were in charge?
I would say, look, Monsieur Barnier, you're a very personable sort of guy, and I don't want to fall out with you, and I don't want to fall out with people in the EU generally, the population of the EU, but you haven't been elected by anyone, nor has Mr. Juncker, and we can't submit your ultimatum. We'll be better off without a deal. And I'm sure your companies in the EU will want to trade with us. They trade with the rest of the world. And I'll say my company, Michel, Wetherspoon, is ready to leave the EU on Monday because there's been a big scare stories put up by the CBI that you need months of preparation or years of preparation. For 95% of companies, it's simply not true.
There are one or two companies, Tim, who would suffer inconveniences if there were tariffs exporting into Europe, aren't there?
That is true, yes, that is true. But I think that the amount of money saved by the public on imports, because we import far more than we export, means that the UK would be better off overall, and it can help those companies. But I just think the UK would be in such a powerful position because we import so much. They've got excellent businesses in the EU. We don't deny that. Because we import so much, just imagine what the public would do if if the EU unelected oligarchs charged us tariffs. When we weren't charging them tariffs, would French wine sales go up? No, I think people would be mad.
Yeah. I completely understand that argument. Yeah. So, Tim, I've asked you what you'd say to Monsieur Barnier, and finally on this Sunday morning, I'm going to ask you, please give the Prime Minister a piece of advice.
I'd say, Theresa, you're a very nice gal. You're in a very difficult position. I can see that, and everyone's telling you to do different things, but follow the advice of Timbo. And don't pay any money out and persuade everyone else that World Trade Organization rules equals lower food prices. What a win for the UK.
Very good, clear message, Tim. Thank you very much indeed. That was Tim Martin, chairman and founder of the pub chain Wetherspoons, making an argument that virtually nobody else has made at all, that by leaving the European Union, we have the ability to get rid of tariffs that the EU puts on products coming into the UK from all over the world. And Tim was focusing there particularly on food. He believes it'll lead to lower food prices. I'm going to very quickly go to Paul in Brecon in mid-Wales. Paul, what do you make of Monsieur Barnier's ultimatum, and what should we do?
Well, first of all, I'd take their advice, which was right at the beginning, there's no deal unless there's a total deal.
They did say that, didn't they?
It's the deal. And they made that clear at the beginning of the EU, so I'm taking your advice, and I'm not going to write you a blank cheque, not knowing what I'm going to get back. That's number one. I've been exporting for over 30 years. I export to the EU, have done, for ages.
Yep.
And and there's no particular problem. The drop in the pound more than compensates for any tariff. If we had tariffs, we'd collect much more from them. If we went to WTO, we would lose immediately the net subsidy of 10 or 12 billion. We would gain another 5 or 6 billion in tariffs if we carried on trade, because they'd have to pay a lot of tariffs to get to us on their balance of trade. And, in a business negotiation, if I sat down with someone who said, I'm going to sell much more to you than you sell to me, and for this, I'm going to blackmail you with a huge bill. That is the situation.
Paul has made the case there very clearly that this is not Paul, I thank you. Paul has made the case there very clearly. I want to hear from those of you who believe what you're being told by our Westminster politicians and the CBI. Please come on and tell me that Paul from Brecon and Tim Martin have got it completely wrong. You can do it by calling 0345 6060 973. You can, of course, text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. You can watch us on Facebook. Comment there too. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:15. 500 days into Brexit, 500 to go, and Michel Barnier is demanding that within a fortnight we cough up 60 billion euros. And remarkably, when it comes to Northern Ireland, hand in glove with the Dublin government, they're now suggesting that Northern Ireland should have a sort of Hong Kong-style autonomy, that they would have a distinct membership separate from the rest of the United Kingdom at the World Trade Organization, that they would remain in the customs union, in the single market, and would not be allowed to have any laws that deviated in any way from the South. Frankly, what Barney is doing here, he's trying to use Brexit as a means of breaking up the United Kingdom. They're happy to break away Northern Ireland. They would have been delighted if the Scots, of course, had voted for separation back in 2014, because they believe that the Scottish nationalists, Sinn Féin and people like that are pro-European Union. Different principles, of course, apply in Catalonia. But it seems all round that we've got to give Northern Ireland a distinctly different constitutional structure. We've got to give away a huge sum of money, and that's before they will even discuss a trade deal with us to maintain what is called free trade with the European Union, which has always been a huge misnomer. And Philip from Whiteleaf in Surrey is on the money here by text. He says, we already pay tariffs. It's our contribution to the EU, and it's at least twice what we would pay under WTO rules. Philip, we're paying 10 billion quid a year net to be a member of this club. We do not have free trade. You're absolutely right. Graham says, Tim Martin is simply excellent. He took 4 minutes to demolish the Ramonas. Put him in charge, Graham suggests. How about we give the EU an ultimatum? Either start trade talks or you won't get a penny, I get by Twitter. Would you know what? I tell you what, that actually makes to me a lot of sense. Now, my next caller is Matthew from Heathrow. I've spoken to him in previous months. He was a Remain voter. Matthew, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. Yeah, as you say, I was a Remain. Accepted we're going to have to leave.
Yes.
The majority were leaving. But basically, I think if they don't want us to go onto the trade talks, it's time for Theresa May to put her heels in. And, I mean, she's offered to say that they're going to be compensated for what we've committed for, and also if in the transition period we're going to sort of carry on paying. But basically, we've got to find out about the trade before we can finalise anything.
Absolutely.
In Northern Ireland. But the only way, I think, I mean, she's got to put her heels in the ground. If they're not going to go on to the trade court talks, it's basically time to actually revoke the Article 50, because we need more time to set up the immigration structure and also the trading. So I think we need a few years for that. So we've got to revoke it. We're going to have to stay in. Then we'll invoke it again. And basically, we'll get ourselves ready to work on WTO rules.
So you think we need more time, Matthew, do you?
We need more time. I'm involved in trade, and I mean, we're going to see it this week. Any little hiccup on transporting goods to and from Europe, I mean, we're going to see it this week on the M20. I mean, because there's a technical problem on the Channel Tunnel, they're going to, with the trucks, they're going to be Operation Stack this week. We're going to see miles.
Which is horrendous, isn't it? Yeah. So actually, as EU members, we get Operation Stack anyway sometimes, don't we?
Well, yeah, if there's any slowdown in the transportation of goods, and if we suddenly leave with no deal in 1.5 years' time, I mean, we're not going to be ready to get those structures in place.
So,
I mean, we're going to...
Presumably, Matthew, if we, and you're involved in this, but if we don't get a tariff-free deal, and it's beginning to look like Mr. Barnier doesn't actually want one, so if we don't get a tariff-free deal, we've got, and I forget the number, is it 12,000 lorries a day going back and forth through the Channel Tunnel? It's something like that. It may even be higher.
That's right. I mean, it's in and on the ferries and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's massive.
The Channel Tunnel.
So presumably what we need to get in place to make this as smooth as possible is some form of camera number plate recognition for lorries, yeah?
Well, it's more than that. I mean, it's the customs clearance facilities and everything, the parking of trucks, and getting all the companies educated, and there is going to be a cost, and all the companies have to pass this on to the customers. But as you mentioned, that we can actually, the government can subsidise these tariffs,
and we can do it through the money if we're
money.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, if we're charging European goods coming into the country, there'll be more than enough money to do that. Matthew, my point of view as a businessman that came into politics later is that common sense dictates we should have a continued tariff-free deal. We're not dealing with common sense. We're dealing with a political union worried about its future. Finally, Matthew, very quickly, do you think that Monsieur Barnier has behaved in a reasonable manner?
Well, I think it's really clear that it looks like they just want our money and before and not give us that free trade. And I think, we shouldn't be committing any money until we know we're going to.
No, I couldn't agree more, Matthew. I couldn't agree more. I thank you for that. I think Barnier's behaviour is wholly unreasonable. I mean, after all, you wouldn't sell your house and give someone the keys on the promise they'll tell you later how much they're going to pay you for it. It doesn't make any sense. Stuart on Facebook says the EU is just acting hard in an attempt to frighten us. Don't fall for it. Davy says, Monsieur Barnier should not underestimate the people of Northern Ireland. Does he really think he can tell people what to do? Davy, what he's doing with Northern Ireland is frankly outrageous. Jordan says the UK looks like a joke to the world right now. It's embarrassing. Well, that's not because we've voted Brexit, Jordan. It's because our government seem to be having a bit of problem in implementing it. And another Stuart on Facebook says, how about give nothing and just let them keep the property assets we have an interest in? Well, that's true. And we've also got a share of the wine cellar, Stuart, presumably, which I'm told at the European Commission, they never invite me, but I'm told that the European Commission is terribly, terribly good. Oh, and I forgot. There's the 9 billion sterling investment in the European Investment Bank as well. I'm asked here on Twitter by Chris, what would you do about Northern Ireland? Chris, I would say to Southern Ireland, to ERA, you need us very, very badly. I mean, certainly in terms of agriculture, something like 40% of Irish meat production comes into the United Kingdom. And a tariff regime on agricultural produce could potentially hurt Ireland very, very badly. Ireland should be the ones, above all, pushing in Brussels for a simple tariff-free deal. And yet, no country in the European Union has yes men of the calibre of those in Dublin. Whenever they're asked to jump how high, whether it's to do with the euro or whatever it is, they always do as they're told. So we're probably going to finish up, Chris, with a tariff, sadly, with some form of tariff regime between the north and the south. And that will mean that we will have to have minimum number plate recognition. There will have to be a customs border of some kind. That is not the same as returning to the bad old days, and I'd rather we didn't need to have it at all. And don't forget, when it comes to people moving north and south, we won't need to check individuals. Why? Firstly, Ireland's not in Schengen, and secondly, we've had a common travel area since 1921. It isn't simple, Chris, but if we had a tariff-free deal, boy, it would be simple. And everybody in the south would rather have, ultimately, a tariff-free deal. Everybody in the north would rather have a tariff-free deal. The British government would rather have a tariff-free deal. Monsieur Barnier doesn't want a tariff-free deal. Tony is calling me from Gosport. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Nigel. I've wanted this day for so long. I'm a family man, don't get time to listen to as much in the way of politics as I would normally get a chance to.
Yeah.
I have to say, when you're going to get somebody on who's a Ramoniac like me, you always have to have a wonderful monologue about how we're all off our nuts, and isn't it going to be easy to do this?
No, Tony, I've never ever said you're all off your nuts, ever. I've never ever said that, and I do understand, Tony, there are people who want a United States of Europe and want Britain to be part of that, a province of that, call it what you will. I've always recognised that as an intellectually honest position. What I hate are people like Nick Clegg who tell me, don't worry, it's not really about political union. That's what really upsets me, Tony.
Well, I don't dispute that, but I mean, whether you call it a federation of nation states, a confederation, what kind of arrangement, the bottom line is, I said before this crazy chaos got going, before we even had the referendum, I said to my friend, David Cameron doing this is disastrous, whoever advised him is crazy, because the Continentals en masse, sadly for you who wish to see the breakup of the EU, do not care as much about the UK, anywhere near as much as they do about protecting 75 years of stability and peace and prosperity on our continent. Yes, it's not perfect, Nigel.
No, Catalonia is certainly not perfect, is it?
No, it's not, but even though the Catalonians and the Scots, in the main, still feel European and want to be part of the EU. Most countries or states that want to break away, like Lombardia in northern Italy, for example, would want to remain in the EU. They do not want to go it alone completely. My point was simply that, and I'd rather have a chat over a beer with you at some stage.
Okay.
Probably won't get the chance.
You never know.
I do believe that you guys we're too simplistic in dreaming about all this. And the number of people that go, I don't care if we're worse off, I want my country back.
Absolutely. And do you know what, Tony? Ultimately, you can make arguments about money, whether it's positive or negative. You can talk about tariffs or non-tariffs. Ultimately, Tony, we voted to break free a political union and to govern our own country. I'd love to have longer with you, but sadly, I've got to go because it's 10:30 and Mrs May went to Florence to give her big EU renegotiation speech, and do you know what she did? She blinked. Yes, she did. She blinked. She started to make a series of concessions. She started to say how wonderful the European Union was, that we loved every aspect of it, that we're going to rebadge and rejoin all of it, but just not be members of political union, and that we were prepared to make some quite big financial concessions. And do you know what happens in a negotiation when you blink? The other side see weakness, and they go in for the kill. And that is what Barnier is doing now. And he's doing so, encouraged, of course, by the never-ending stream of British politicians who get the red carpet treatment at the Burlington building in Brussels. Nick Clegg, Ken Clarke, Lord Adonis, Nicola Sturgeon, Carwyn Jones. Virtually every Remainer in the country has been to see Monsieur Barnier. And I thought to myself, I just about had enough of this. So I wrote him a letter. And in fact, I showed you the letter here on LBC. You got it first. Where I said that as leader of the largest group of British MEPs in the European Parliament, and as the leader of the party that won the European elections of 2014, I too would like to have a meeting with him. Well, true to form, I think, he's responded pretty much as I would have expected. No written reply, but a telephone call from his office on Friday suggesting that he meets me in the members' bar this Wednesday. I mean, what a complete and utter joke. What total contempt he treats anybody who wants to leave the European Union with. So I'm not going to meet Monsieur Barnier in the bar. I should write back to him again and say, what about affording at least somebody who wants to speak up for 17.4 million people the opportunity of a proper, formal 10-minute conversation? They're the kind of people we're dealing with. Now what, and the real question here, given this ultimatum, is what should we now do in the face of this? And rather than me answering that, Mark on Twitter does it for me. He says, I'm getting sick of our politicians making concession after concession to the EU whilst getting absolutely nothing in return. It's about time for our side to deliver our own ultimatum. I simply couldn't agree more. Ertan is calling me from Enfield. Good morning, Ertan.
Good morning, Nigel. Privileged to talk to you, sir.
Good morning. So what would you do? You know, imagine you're David Davis or Theresa May, bully boy Barnier has just said, cough up and look big, or we're not even going to discuss trade. What would you do?
The first thing I'd do, Nigel, is I'd go to the great British people and say to them, we're going to issue a Brexit bond, and people like myself who voted to leave would be more than happy to pay to purchase, say, £1,000 worth of these bonds based on the premium bond principle. So you don't pay interest, but you pay people some winnings, for example. Turn around and say, right, Barnier, we've raised 30 billion from the great British people. Take it or leave it, sir. If you leave it, we will inject all this money into the British economy and soften any Brexit.
But why should we? But Ertan, it's a novel, fascinating idea. But why should we give them as much as 30 billion anyway?
I don't want to give it to them, Nigel. But if we've got the 30 billion in the pot, which people like myself who voted Brexit are committing, it's the price I'm willing to pay to get out of the EU.
So you're willing to pay a price to get out of the EU, provided that we have a tariff-free deal both ways, yeah?
Absolutely. And if they refuse, we'll say, well, that's fine, because the British people, predominantly those who voted for Brexit, put their hands in their pocket and they're going to put 30 billion or 50 billion straight back into the British economy to help it go forward.
Because right now they're saying, pay us all this money and we might consider giving you a trade deal. I mean, that's a rotten place for the British Prime Minister to be.
Absolute nonsense. If we've got the money and the British people have put their hands in their pocket and dangle it in front of the EU, they will take it and they'll give us a tariff-free deal.
I'm not sure that idea would fly. I'm not sure that even I would trust the government with my money right at this moment in time, because I'm not sure they're that committed to getting what we want. But Ertan, fascinating idea. Interesting point. Have I any more news, I'm asked, about the EU army? I've seen nothing in the press or TV about it since you mentioned it on Friday evening. People are unaware about this, says Lynn in Coventry. Well, Lynn, all I can tell you is the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union is meeting tomorrow in Brussels. There will be British representation there. I'm not sure exactly which government minister is going, but there is going to be a big move towards a further centralisation of military responses at an EU level. And I don't know yet whether the British government, despite the fact we voted Brexit, are going to sign up to this or not. I'll be watching developments in Brussels tomorrow like a hawk, because I can't believe if you're going to vote Brexit, why on earth would you be part of a move towards a European army? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Flamur is calling from Grays in Essex. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Farage. How are you?
I'm very well. So what do you make of the situation we're in with Monsieur Barnier making these demands? Is he being reasonable?
Come on, I think everybody knows the answer to that question.
Yeah, I think they do.
Look, I think I'm going to put my hands up straight away. I was a Remainer.
Yeah.
I did vote Remain, and obviously I wasn't happy with the result. But listen, that's part of a democracy. Just because you don't like something, you can't then go back on it just because you was in the minority.
Oh God! I tell you what, Flamur, I better organise lunch with you and Nick Clegg, really, hadn't I? Because he doesn't quite see it like that.
He doesn't, I'm afraid, but that's why his political party isn't first at the moment, and it's rather kind of just gone downhill. But there you go. Look, I think the smartest thing to do, you mentioned about Theresa May blinking. I don't think she blinked. I think she laid all her cards down and just said to Michel Barnier, just give it to me, just rinse me in front of my whole country and just take everything away from me. She shouldn't have made the speech the way she did. It's good that she made a speech, but I think what she was talking about and kind of sucking up to all the EU bureaucrats just completely blew us out of the water. They've basically got everything under their control. I think the best thing to do is to potentially revoke Article 50 and become a very difficult member for the EU to the point where they're forced to give us some sort of deal, where we just veto everything, whatever it be, from fisheries to an EU army, whatever it is.
Well, I think you'll find, Flamur, I think we're sort of beyond that now, because for example, take fisheries. When the fisheries councils meet in future, we're not going to be in the room, because we are withdrawing. So we've got this amazing situation where next month the quotas, the pathetic quotas that the UK fleet are allowed to catch in our own waters, will be decided on without us even having a vote or being in the room.
No, that's right. And you see, that's the problem when you've got politicians such as Theresa May, who I think her main worry is holding on to her own seat and her own power within the Tories, rather than actually putting a good proposal down for her population.
I think her own seat is pretty safe out there in Maidenhead. But from her, I would put it to you, the problem with Theresa May is she's trying to appease both wings of her party at the same time, her divided party, her divided cabinet, and she's fearful of striking out firmly and really doing something. Now, I know that there's going to be a vote on Tuesday about saying we will actually leave the European Union, at the end of March 2019. But frankly, and unless we know whether we're still part of the single market, how long transition is, it doesn't mean very much. Flimmer, I'd put it to you, there is a genuine lack of leadership in this country. We look weak, and Barnier is taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you, and I also would like to agree with you when you mentioned about how the main focus is on what Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn is doing, but then we're forgetting the legitimacy of again, I didn't vote UKIP either in the general election, but I think we have to acknowledge the legitimacy of people such as MEPs and the people who are representing those who voted to leave, because again, they were in the majority. So just because the politicians who are in power at the moment don't necessarily represent those who voted leave, we can't ignore those people and the people who they voted for. So I do agree with you. I think there's a lack of leadership.
Yeah, there really is.
From the main parties. I mean, this as soon as you've got Theresa May doing deals with the DUP just to stay in power. I think that says it all, to be honest.
Flimmer, you've said it all. Well done. Great call. And Flimmer, there's somebody who voted Remain but believes in democracy and thinks we should now get on with it and accepts that Monsieur Barnier is behaving very, very badly. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:45. Mrs May and David Davis face an ultimatum from Monsieur Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator. We've got to promise them a shed load of money, a completely different deal for Northern Ireland, and unless we do it all within a fortnight, there will be no talk about trade at the December the 15th summit of European leaders. In fact, we'll have to wait until next March to have this conversation, by which time Article 50 will effectively be running out. He thinks he's got us on the run, and that is because the Prime Minister blinked in her speech in Florence. We look weak, and they genuinely in Brussels don't think there are any circumstances in which we'd leave without a deal. They don't believe a no-deal scenario is possible. And by the way, there is no such thing as a no-deal, because if we don't have a deal with the European Union, we will have a deal on WTO rules, which is how most trade around the rest of the world is conducted. Duncan says, right, here's the plan. Tell them we intend to pay them 20 quid, but reduce it by 50p each day until they accept it. Sorted, says Duncan. Andrew in Docklands is calling me. Good morning, Andrew. So, come on, Monsieur Barnier's ultimatum, put yourself in the shoes of the British government. What do you say?
Well, I think she's on the same side as Michel Barnier, so I don't think she's on our side. She should pay them absolutely nothing, and as you've said, and I think everybody sensible has said, walk away, deal with World Trade Organization rules, and let's call their bluff. Basically, they seem to be sawing through the very thin branch they're sitting on at the moment.
Yes, I mean, I have to say that to do that, the difficulty, of course, with doing that for the Prime Minister is that she doesn't think she'd get the support of Parliament if she did so.
Well, it's the support of the 17.4 million people who actually voted. That's what she wants. As a small businessman, I'm incredibly frustrated how long this whole process is taking. I thought it was going to be very quick. As David Cameron said, I thought we were going to have a quick process, and I was looking forward to taking the customers off a lot of those big corporate people and giving them a much better service, a much better deal than what they're getting at the moment. We are the nimbler companies, and we can run rings around those big corporates that need all the subsidies.
So you're not scared, Andrew? As a businessman, you're not scared at all then about leaving the European Union? You see it as an opportunity?
I can't wait for it. It's been absolutely terrible. I was burning more, Nigel, 25 years ago through my business. We got halved during the crash, and I was earning more 25 years ago, and I had the choice of flats and houses I could have bought back then. Now it's an impossibility.
And why, Andrew? Why does Brexit help your business? Explain.
Well, because basically the big companies, the ones that are subsidised, they get all the QE first, the big corporates, the banks, they get all that money for free, and they still can't make a go of it. They're still not very good. They're the ones who have just bloated themselves to a huge size, and they're just zombies, as we often hear that expression, and they cannot serve their customers. Big companies are very, very vulnerable around the periphery to nimble competition, and that's what we want.
Okay, so is your message, Andrew, to the British government, just get on with it?
Absolutely. Get on with it. Get out. Get on with it.
Get out, says Andrew from Dockland, small businessman. He's a bit frustrated, he said. He sounded a bit more than frustrated to me. Alex is calling from Camden. Alex, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. You just listened to that last reply and you realise the level of incoherence that is espoused in this position of let's just get out.
Well, Alex, be fair. Alex, be fair to businessmen like Andrew. It's worth remembering that over 80% of the British economy doesn't involve international trade of any kind at all.
Well, that's all well and good, Andrew. I'm a business person. I've employed people and I've run businesses.
Yeah.
When you are looking at something as intricate and as delicate as the British economy, you have to look at its diversification. So, with all due respect to your last caller, it's a lot bigger than him, and he may think he can make some headway from larger businesses that are doing better than him, but it's a lot bigger than that. And I think you've been talking a lot about the WTO, Nigel, this morning, and you've been given a lot of inaccuracies to the British public, and I have to correct you.
Well, I've said very little. Actually, Alex, to be honest, I've said very little. I've listened to businessmen and Tim Martin speaking this morning.
I know, but you haven't corrected them, Nigel. You've been talking utter rubbish. Look,
really?
The Independent newspaper.
Cheaper food, Alex.
Well, that's the point I'm addressing. I heard that discussion about cheaper food. The Independent newspaper, which is independent,
come off it.
Well, it's more independent than people on one side or the other.
Go on.
Ridiculous debate. What they did was to look at the various sectors and how those sectors would be affected by Brexit. And I've got an open mind on this, Nigel. If you're going to do Brexit, doesn't mean it has to be done badly.
Sure.
And this is what's wrong with the people who voted out. Is so many of them are so dogmatic about it that they don't even want to do it right. Okay, so you're leaving the European Union, so you should make a complete dog's breakfast of it.
No, Alex, I've always been in favour. I've always been in favour of Brexit, as you well know. And as somebody that worked in business for 20 years, I would like a common-sense tariff-free deal. But I'm beginning to recognise, Alex, that in this negotiation, Barnier is showing himself to be literally impossible.
But Nigel, you put so much emphasis on the characters like Barnier and Juncker, who are not really the power within the European Union.
Really?
You realise, of course.
So is it the Germans then?
They are figureheads for a union of different nations. All of those nations have elected governments.
They are, Alex, the guardians of the treaty. They are the guardians of the treaty, Nigel, to which member states have signed up and are subjugated by.
Nigel, you know what? I haven't had the chance to speak to you on the radio before, but I'm glad I have today, because you need to be put in your place about the misconceptions you put around.
Alex, do you understand? Do you understand, Alex? This is a treaty-based organisation.
I do, Nigel. Do you understand that? And do you realise...
I completely understand, Alex, that there is legal supremacy, and it's in Brussels, and it's managed by the commissioners.
Over what, Nigel? Over what?
Trade policy. Legislation.
You've been misleading
workers' rights
to make them think... Yes, good thing too.
So we shouldn't be sovereign.
It's not about not being sovereign. We wrote most of those laws that we are following in the EU.
But we can't.
We wrote most of them.
But Alex, we can't change them.
But you've misled the...
We can't change them. Oh, of course, the British Civil Service are more than capable of writing bad law. Alex, we are leaving. Do you accept that?
I don't, actually.
All right.
I looked at the headlines on Friday, Nigel, and do you know what I thought? I thought Theresa May's government is about to collapse.
Alex, you may well be right. Thank you. You may well be right, in the sense that Theresa May's government's about to collapse. As 11 o'clock approaches, let's hear the words of an Afghanistan veteran.
Hello, I'm Duncan Slater. I served for 14 years in the Royal Air Force. I was a sergeant responsible for about 30 soldiers out in Afghan. I got injured on the 31st of July 2009. It was a normal start to the day. We were in a compound that we'd taken the night before, driving down a fairly nondescript kind of track, and my vehicle was blown up by quite a large improvised explosive device. It was quite a big one. I threw it down the road like it was a little toy, really. Unfortunately for me, I was blown out of the vehicle, so my legs were completely smashed, broke the lower part of my back, and broke most of my ribs on my left-hand side, broken arm, broken shoulder blade, and all the rest of it. And because I was blown about 30 feet out of the vehicle, nobody knew where I was, so I was on my own, and I tried to give myself some sort of first aid as much as I could with one arm. That just didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what way I was at. And then within 22 hours of getting injured, I was back in the UK. After about a year, they said, look, your legs are not working, and I was in a lot of pain, so that's when we went for the amputations. Hands down, the best thing I've ever done. I kind of looked at walking again as like a second chance in life, really. It was taken away from me and then it was given back, but it was just walking on prosthetics but I could walk about, so it was a massive bonus. So I thought, well, I now want to push myself and find out what kind of person I am. So the first thing I ever did was I cycled Lanzarote to John O'Groats with a friend. We did that for charity, and I went to the South Pole with Prince Harry in 2013. That was with the charity Walking with the Wounded. So they gave me a huge opportunity to go and do that. And then I ran the London Marathon, which was brilliant. I'd recommend that to anyone. Without my wife and my little girl, none of this would have been possible, without a shadow of a doubt, because they're always there. People are there in the good times, but they're there on the bad times, and they give you the sort of kick up the backside to keep going, and it's something that you can't repay. I remember being a little boy, always watching the parades, wearing a poppy with sort of pride, and it's funny that, I used to look at those old fellas with sort of so much respect, and it's funny that I still look at guys, but they're a lot younger now on the parades, and I still look at them with the same level of respect and think without them, we wouldn't have the things we take for granted in this country. We're very lucky. It's really important for everyone to take 2 minutes out of their day. 2 minutes is nothing, is it? You can't even make a cup of tea in 2 minutes. Just to set that time aside, just to have a little bit of reflection on what people have done and what people are doing still. 2 minutes is nothing to stick your phone on silent and just think about these things. It's important. It's just approaching 11 o'clock on Remembrance Sunday. It's a moment, a chance for all of us across the nation to come together, to remember, to reflect and honour all of those who have sacrificed themselves to secure and protect our freedom. With a 2-minute silence. Thank you. That was a 2-minute silence on Remembrance Sunday, honouring all of those who have suffered or died in war.
You're listening to LBC.